today's Kwibuka Podcast episode, the genocidal government begins to realize that the RPF Inkotanyi systematic advancement, liberating cities and rescuing survivors along the way. Prime Minister Jean Kambanda issues written instructions, including details on civilian self-protection, which was intended to continue to incite Hutu civilians to join the killings. Despite the outright mobilization and citizen incitement to participate in the killings, the United Nations is slow to appropriately categorize the killings of Tutsis happening in Rwanda. Genocide intensified in the southern region of the country, and Inkotanyi continued to liberate some parts of the country. Gitega is located in Ryanza Cell, Kwibuka sector, Kamonyi district. During the genocide against the Tutsi, a roadblock was set up in Gitega, preventing Tutsis from crossing from different parts to seek refuge in Kabgayi. At the time, Tutsis were choosing to cross the road to Kwibuka, trying to bypass the roadblocks and soldiers on the main road to Gitarama. Many Tutsis were killed at this particular roadblock on different days. There are well-known dates from 16th May 1994 to 18th May 1994, on which only boys were targeted at the roadblocks. On 16th May 1994, Interahamwe militia ordered women who were evacuated from Musambira Health Center that whoever had a boy child should not go beyond the roadblock. Because parents knew that boys were most hunted, they tried to dress them in girls' outfits. There was a woman called Mukangango Laurence who started to undress every child to make sure they were not boys. Those who were found to be boys were dragged into a pit nearby. Some of these boys were thrown in alive, while those who refused to comply were beheaded and thrown in the pit in pieces. Parents were asked to bury them by closing the pit, which they refused and only complied after being severely beaten. Later, the parents who lost their children on that roadblock recounted as they were burying them, some of the children were trying to get out of the hole but failed. Most of them died shouting and saying if they had removed them from the pit, they would no longer be Tutsis. Some of the parents also died after being severely beaten for refusing to bury their own sons alive. Those who survived the beatings sustained physical injuries. Since the plan was to kill the boys, women and girls were escorted after burying their own children and siblings. They were being beaten on the road all the way to Kwibuka sector, current office. Some of them died in a dense forest that was on a roadside on their way. Upon arrival at Musumba, they were asked to sit and were again beaten severely in presence of the former Burugumestre of Nyamabuye commune, Muhigana, who was holding a meeting nearby. The few who survived were able to find refuge in Kabgayi, while others continued to wander in forests until the genocide was over. At Gitega roadblock, the massacres took place on May 16th, but until May 18th, the Interahamwe militia continued to traffic and kill Tutsi refugees during the 3 days. However, the roadblock remained there until the genocide was stopped in the area in June 1994. After the genocide, the pit in Gitega was exhumed and 82 children were counted. They have now been accorded a decent burial at Kwibuka Genocide Memorial, as well as other 1,830 bodies recovered from the nearby Gatagara Center where the Kwibuka sector was built and in the surrounding areas. Perpetrators of the massacres at Gitega roadblock included Mukangango Konsole, who died in a police station before she could stand trial, Mavuba Joseph and Kagabo Emmanuel. Those who were instrumental in holding meetings at the Gatagara Center include Nyirabigu Fidel, the most prominent of them, who was a businessman, and Aphrodis, who was a teacher. The two worked closely with Yakaremi Abdulrahman, who was the leader of Interahamwe in Musambira commune. As the criminal government forces in Interahamwe and Imuza Migambi militia were losing the battle, and the genocide was progressively being stopped by RPF Inkotanyi forces, many of the killers fled Kigali and killed any Tutsi that they could meet on their way. This is what happened to the Tutsis who had not yet been killed in Kabgayi. By the end of May 1994, between 28th and 30th, the Interahamwe militia took more than 500 Tutsis. Some were trying to flee to Kabgayi, and others were taken among Tutsi refugees who were camping in various houses of the Catholic Church in Kabgayi and killed all of them. UNIMIR was the first to release the information on May 31st, 1994, when one of its leaders, Dr. Abdul Kadia, who was the second in command to General Dallaire, told the media that more than 500 people had been killed by government forces in Gitarama, including many who were taken from Kabgayi. Dr. Katia said that UNAMIR was going to investigate the killings. Various international radio stations reported the killings, including Radio France Internationale, RFI, in its May 31, 1994 news report. The German radio station Deutsche Welle confirmed the information in its broadcast on May 31, 1994, and said that UNAMIR had sent its envoy to Kabgayi to investigate the killings. The news was confirmed by the BBC radio. In their testimonies, the survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi who had sought refuge at Kabgayi recount that multiple times the MRND militia, Interahamwe, the CDR militia, Impuzamugambi, and other members of the Hutu power parties were coming and taking Tutsis by force to go and kill them. Many of those they took from Kabgayi were killed at Nyabarongo riverbanks and thrown in the water. Women and girls were thrown into the river alive after being raped. The RPF Inkotanyi forces liberated Kabgayi on June 2, 1994. On May 26, 1994, the RPF Inkotanyi forces captured parts of Kigali city, namely Kicukiro, Gatenga, and rescued some Tutsis and other citizens who had been taken hostage by the killers. Gatenga was ravaged by many Interahamwe militia, led by Twahirwa Serafin, a former employee of the Ministry of Public Services, Minitrap, who was arrested in Belgium. Soldiers of the criminal government and Interahamwe militia started to flee from the city of Kigali to Gitarama and Ruhengeri prefectures. On May 27, 1994, the UNAMIR started to evacuate people who were hiding in Hotel de Mille Collines to their desired destinations. Some wanted to go to the territory that was still under the control of the criminal government, while others wanted to go to the territory that had been liberated by the RPF Inkotanyi. The RPF Inkotanyi forces persistently demanded that government soldiers should lay down their arms and stop the killings and work together to repair the damage and rebuild a country, but in vain. On this date, more than half of Rwanda had been liberated by the RPF Inkotanyi forces. Also on the same day, UNAMIR announced that in the near future, the RPF Inkotanyi forces will have taken control of the entire city of Kigali. On May 28, 1994, Radio France International, RFI, reported that members of the criminal government had left Gitarama and fled to Kibuye. The RFI correspondent, Monique Mass, who was in Rwanda, went to Nyamata and reported that more than half of the population of Nyamata town before the genocide had been exterminated by Interahamwe militia and government forces. This was also confirmed by a Belgian professor, Alain Vergen, in an interview with RFI in Brussels after he had left Rwanda, where he worked with the Organization of Doctors Without Borders, Belgium, MSF, which then worked in Bugesera. On the same day, Ambassador Amri Sued, who was among the refugees evacuated from Hotel de Mille Collines by UNAMIR and had chosen to join the RPF-controlled area, also reported to RFI the seriousness of the genocide against the Tutsi, perpetrated by the genocidal government and Interahamwe militia. He further recommended that the RPF Inkotanyi military campaign to stop genocide should be supported by the whole world. Since May 22, 1994, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights had convened a meeting in Geneva to analyze the nature of the killings against the Tutsi in Rwanda. They also announced that the perpetrators of the killings in Rwanda could be brought to justice. During the meeting, Bishop Desmond Tutu, a South African, spoke out against the genocide in Rwanda and called for the perpetrators to be persecuted. Stanislas Mbonameka, the former second vice president of PL Power, who was one of the envoys sent to the meeting by the criminal government, condemned the statement by Desmond Tutu and falsely claimed that no killings were being carried out by the government he represented, that the RPF should be held accountable for the killings. Mbonameka was aware of the fact that the massacres of Tutsis in Gitarama, Kibuye, and other parts of the country at the time were not taking place in the RPF Inkotanyi-controlled areas. He said that in order to confuse people and clear the government he represented. Before returning to Rwanda after the Geneva meeting, Mbonameka went to Paris. On May 24, 1994, Radio France International, RFI, reported that Amnesty International had condemned the killings by the then Rwandan government and Interahamwe militia. On May 25, 1994, the UN envoy Iqbal Riza, who was on a visit to Rwanda, met with representatives of the Rwandan government, but no decision was taken in regard to stopping the genocide. Iqbal Riza met them in their hideout in Gitarama, where they were camping. The genocidal government and its militia accelerates genocide against the Tutsi, and UN debates about the categorization of the killings in Rwanda came to an end. While the genocidal government organized the population and gave them specific instructions on the systematic and widespread elimination of Tutsis, the United Nations continued to procrastinate its debate on the true nature of the massacres which were being perpetrated against the Tutsi. The genocidal government had issued instructions on May 25, 1994, to all prefects to provide detailed plans of genocide acceleration. Although the world was well informed about the systematic and extensive massacres against the Tutsi, there was a desire to make the massacres less noticeable. The Prime Minister of the genocidal government, Jean Kambanda, called on the population to participate actively in the killings. After the training, the civilian population was to be used to track down and kill Tutsis. Thank you for listening to another episode of Kwibuka Podcast. As always, make sure you leave us a review, sharing what you like about the podcast, and share with others who would be interested in listening.